One of the challenging parts of predicting a return is the existence of uncertainty when it comes to the economy. Now, we might be able to follow trends to anticipate when the economy is slowing down or will be booming, but in order to be accurate in our assumption, we need to calculate the probability of the occurrence of the different economic states. So, an example 8.3 on page 224, we are doing just that. Now you should stop the video now and read the example. I do not like the way the data is being reflected in table 8.3, and I think it is equally confusing on page 225. So I'm going to rewrite these tables again, and I believe that it'll make it clearer. So basically, Tim has been studying the government bond market and has identified some trends during economic booms, recessions, and when it is steady. And based upon his further analysis, he arrived at the probability of each economic state, and that is what he lists in column 1 and 2. So let's start out with economic state. And again, this is following along with example 8.3 on page 224. We have a boom economy, a steady economy, and a recession. Okay. And then we have, if we name this A, then we have the probability of A. And what we're going to do is we're going to convert these percentages over to decimals because it'll make it easier to deal with until the end of the chart. So the decimal form of 25%, the probability of an expected boom, the probability of the economy remaining steady by 55%, and then the probability of a recession, the decimal form of 20%. And in the third column, he lists the actual returns that you can expect under each economic state. So in column 3, we have 2% return during booms and a 5% return during steady economic conditions and a 10% return during recessions. Now when we multiply the probability of the economic state times the return, we get the next column, 25.25 times 0.02. Go ahead and take the calculator out on this. 0.25 times 0.02, and we get the answer 0.005. And we do the same thing again. The probability of the economy remaining steady and the chance of a 0.05% return, 0.55 times 0.05, we get 0.0275. And then the probability of a recession times the probability, or times the return under a recession, so 0.20 times 0.10. That gives us 0.02. And this is where I think the book should have added, the editor should have added another column. In order to convert this back over to the percentages like they reflect in the book, this needs to be multiplied by 100, and they don't show that. So if we go back and we take this 0.005 and multiply it by 100, then we get that 0.50 percentage that is shown in the chart in the book. And then we do the same thing with 0.0275 times 100, 2.75, and then the last one, 0.02 times 100, and we get 2.0. And then when we add all of these together, 2.75 plus 0.5, we get 5.25%, which is the expected return. Okay. Now in the second part of this, we're going to calculate the variance, but we're going to use the expected return. So since we're going to have to refer back to it, I'm going to write it over here just so that it stays right there in our face, 5.25% return, and then of course the decimal version of 5.25% is 0.0525. Okay, so since we're going to continue this forward onto page 225, we're going to cover up these columns right here and then carry our analysis a little further, because the first two columns are going to be exactly the same except they're written in decimal points rather than in percentages. Now on page 225 we're going to start in the third column, but there's going to be a slight difference. We are going to subtract the return in each economic state from the expected return. So let's write it like this: R1 minus expected return. Okay. All right. So let me show you how we're calculating this first one. 0.02 minus 0.0525. All right. And when we put this on the calculator, 0.02 minus 0.0525, we get a negative number of negative 0.0325. And how do we get rid of negative numbers? Well, we square them. So in this next column, we're going to take what we did here and we're going to square it. So we're going to use this key x squared, and that gives us 0.001056. Okay. And then the last thing that they should have reflected in the book but they didn't is that now we're going to take this column and we're going to multiply that by the probability of the occurrence. And they don't really set that up very well, but we're going to take this 0.001056 and we're going to multiply it by the probability of A, which is 0.25, and that's how you get the answer in the far right column on the chart on page 225. Okay, so let's go right through the second one again. We have our return of 0.05. We're going to subtract our expected return of 0.0525. And of course, this is going to give us another negative number, 0.05 minus 0.0525. That gives us a negative 0.0025. We've got to get rid of the negative number, so we're going to square that, and that's going to give us 0.000006. And then when we multiply that number times the probability of 0.55, we get let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yep, 5 zeros. 0.000003. And then one more. We take the expected return of 0.10 minus the expected return 0.0525. And that number is going to be positive. So we're going to take 0.10 minus 0.0525. That's going to give us a positive 0.4750. And we'll square that number. And that's going to give us 0.02256. And we're going to multiply that number by the probability of a recession, which is 20%, 0.2. And that gives us 0.000451. And you'll see, if you compare what I've written here to the chart on page 225, that far right column is exactly the same. So when we add these three numbers up, we get a sum of the squared differences of 0.000718, and of course we'll just put our little sigma mark there. Okay. All right, and that is also our variance. Okay. All right, and then when we take the square root of that, which is this key right here, we get 0.026796, and if we convert that over to decimal, we get 2.6796% or 2.68% with rounding. Okay, and how do we use that number? Well, we compare this, which is a measure of risk, And we compare this number here, 2.68% to 5.25%. So we're going to make more of a return than there is risk, so we would make this investment. But if we didn't feel like we were going to make this return and it was going to come in lower than the 2.68, then we would walk away from this investment because the risk would be higher than the expected return. But that's what we do, we compare them. So as long as your expected return is higher than your measure of risk, then you would move forward on that investment.